So your tenant just passed away and a family member frantically calls you to get access to the property because they want to go inside and remove all of their belongings. Are you actually able to give them access? Do you need to change the locks? What do you do about utilities? All of this is stuff that you're going to have to think through when a tenant passes away in your property or passes away outside of your property. If they pass away inside the property, you're definitely going to want to use a licensed and insured company to do all of the cleanup. But before we get to the extra steps, there's some things that you want to think about in regards to the Florida landlord laws that are going to outline how to take possession and consider what you need to do as next steps. And of course, the best thing you can do is call a real estate attorney or your property manager to help deal with the issues. The first step is determining who is actually on the lease. So before you do anything, establish whether the deceased person was the last remaining tenant. If there's a spouse, roommate, or another tenant that's still legally occupying the property, it's going to be a different situation. So the Florida statute is primarily discussing what applies when the last remaining tenant has died. Step number 2, you don't want to immediately give the family any keys. And this is going to be really important, most practical, because obviously that's the first thing that the family members are going to want to do is go in and grab belongings or just sort through stuff. So it could be a mother, son, daughter, boyfriend, any relative. They're going to come to you and say, hey, that was my dad, my mom, brother, sister. I need to get their belongings. But the relationship alone doesn't necessarily give them the legal authority over the deceased tenant's estate. So you need to determine who actually has the authority to act on behalf of the estate. Number 3 is an emergency contact isn't necessarily the decision maker. So this is, kind of a common misconception. You might have someone's mother or maybe there's a cosigner on the lease. That doesn't automatically mean that they're going to be the best person to help out with the situation. The next thing would be, what do you do if someone has power of attorney? Well, a lot of people don't actually realize that when somebody passes away, their power of attorney actually gets terminated. So at that point, you're dealing with the tenant's estate and personal representative, not simply somebody that had a POA. And so the next thing would be, what happens to the lease and possession of the property? So in Florida, there's a 60-day provision that becomes important. It's the Florida Statute 8359. And it's going to contain provisions around the landlord's ability to recover possession of the property. So the conditions that have to be met that it's going to outline is it's the last remaining tenant that died. There's personal property that's still in the unit. The rent is unpaid, and you've had at least 60 days that have elapsed from the tenant's death. And it's important because it's going to give a chance for the probate estate or personal representative to get in touch with you as a property management company, you as the owner, to ultimately decide what the next steps are. So during those 60 days, there's going to be a couple things you're going to think about or kind of be naturally wondering, do we need to change the locks? Is the property secure? Are the utilities going to be on and off? If it's a single family, probably not. Maybe because they didn't pay the bill, it's going to get turned off. If they're in a multifamily property and there's shared utilities, it's possible that there's still stuff there. But there could be stuff in the fridge that's spoiling. There could be pets that you have to worry about. There could be, utilities that are on inside, water leaks, things like that, depending on the nature of the incident, right? And of course, assuming that they also passed away in the unit, there's going to be a lot of cleanup and things to consider as well. Some of those companies that do that type of cleanup may also be able to provide some guidance that's going to be helpful on storing and protecting the belongings inside, especially if there's been hazardous material or hazardous waste on that stuff. So you want to be careful. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're just documenting everything. So the furniture, electronics, jewelry, videos, photographs, anything you can to make sure stuff gets organized and to have record of anybody going in and out of the property during this time. Next one would be, what do you do if a personal representative contacts you? So if someone has legally been appointed to represent the estate, you're going to be kind of coordinating access, removal of belongings, documenting the property condition, addressing the outstanding rent, security deposits, keys, stuff like that. So another thing you're going to have to think about is the security deposit, right? So you get the property cleaned up, you're ready to rent it again. What do you actually do about the deposit? So the tenant's death doesn't mean you can simply forget about how you normally would handle it, right? So you still need to account for unpaid rent, property damages, and cleaning. So you wouldn't really treat it any differently than if the resident was still living. And then, of course, getting the property back on the market, would go through the normal marketing process. So just to recap, a tenant dying isn't something most landlords have to deal with. It is pretty rare and it's unusual, right? So you just want to make sure you have a good team in place, attorneys that are available, people that can advise you on what the best steps are. And it's always a better idea to take things a little bit slower, a little more cautiously in these situations, even if the owner of the property is obviously going to be stressed out if they're making mortgage payments on a house that somebody passed away in and they're having to wait 60 days. So it's going to be a tough situation to kind of work through, but it just, the family doesn't automatically get the keys. Don't assume that you can start packing stuff or throwing stuff out. You really want to document everything. Make sure you understand the laws and of course have advisement around that. And if you own rental properties in Tampa Bay, hopefully you don't have to go through this yourself. We're happy to help any single family, multifamily, townhouses, whatever it is within an hour of Tampa. We'd love to chat more. Subscribe to the channel and check out our podcast, The Tampa Bay Veteran Investor. Thanks for watching. So there's 3 ways that we'd love to stay in contact with everybody. My information is on the screen. We have the YouTube channel. If you scan the QR code, that's going to take you to our newsletter, which is mostly for private clients that we have. So you'll be able to get some perspective of just stuff that we share monthly from there. And of course, the podcast as well. But on the YouTube, we also share a lot of educational content